Hi guys, welcome back to the channel and welcome to another video. So yeah, in this video, I thought I would give you a list of underrated or underappreciated horror movies. Obviously, we're in spooky season, we're in October, so I'm sure a lot of you are probably watching horror movies at the moment. But yeah, I thought I would just give you a list of movies that are maybe not as well known. I could have talked about, some of my favorite horror movies, some of the more popular ones, but I'm sure you guys are probably already aware of them. You've probably already seen them. So I just wanted to basically talk about some that I consider to be very underrated. And yeah, I just wanted to talk about why I love them, even though they are not very well known. And yeah, hopefully you can get something else of this video, maybe some recommendations. But yeah, I just wanted to talk about these movies. So yeah, let's just get straight into it. I have 11 movies here in total. I did originally want to just do 10 movies, but I ended up thinking of 11, and I couldn't think of which movie to drop from this list. So yeah, there are 11 movies in total. So I'm just going to go in alphabetical order with these movies, and the first one I want to talk about is The Appointment, released in 1982. So this is a very underrated British horror movie that stars Edward Woodward. He's probably best known for being in The Wicker Man. Well, this is kind of a hard movie to sell in terms of the story because there isn't really much of a story to this film. But what this film is really good at is making the viewer feel very unsettled and very unnerved. It's a fantastic psychological thriller. It's basically about this family that live in this house in the country in England. And there's some sort of evil presence or evil force kind of slowly working its way up, and it might be psychologically connected to the members of this family. But this movie has such a fantastic opening scene that involves this young girl walking home from school on her own, and it also has a fantastic ending that basically takes place in Snowdonia National Park in Wales. But other than that, I can't really say much more about it without spoiling it too much. All I will say is if you like your psychological horrors or thrillers and movies that like to make you feel unsettled, definitely check out The Appointment. Next up, I'm going to go with Bad Moon, released in 1996. So this is a werewolf film that was directed by Eric Red, who is probably best known for writing the script for the movie The Hitcher, which is a fantastic film. If you've not seen that, definitely check it out. But yeah, this movie is kind of your typical werewolf movie. It's about this guy who gets bitten by a werewolf at the very beginning of the film, and as per the norm with werewolf movies, he turns into a werewolf every full moon. But he ends up staying with his sister and her son and their dog, Thor. And Thor is essentially the main character of the movie. He's a German Shepherd, but he is essentially the main protagonist of the film, which is kind of interesting. Some of the best dog acting I've ever seen in a movie. But obviously, because Thor is a dog, he knows straight away that something is wrong with this guy, and he knows that he's no longer human. So he obviously shows a lot of hostility towards him, but obviously the family don't understand why the dog is acting this way. But it's just a really fun movie. It's only about 80 minutes long. It's really well paced, doesn't outstay its welcome. It's got some really good creature effects in there. And yeah, it's just a really solid werewolf movie from the 90s. So yeah, if you like your werewolf movies, definitely check out Bad Moon. Next up, I'm going to go with The Dark Half. So this is a movie that's based on a Stephen King novel, but not only have you got Stephen King's name attached to this, you've also got George A. Romero directing, so just two giants of horror associated with this film. And I think this is one of Romero's most underrated films. It's basically about this writer who, for the past few years, has been writing under a pseudonym. For anyone who doesn't know what a pseudonym is, it's when a writer writes novels under a different name, and they normally do this to try and see if they can replicate their success under a different name. But when the movie begins, the writer has decided to retire his pseudonym and carry on writing under his regular name. But for some bizarre reason, his pseudonym takes a life of his own and becomes a real person, and he basically becomes his evil doppelganger. So it's kind of like a bit of a Jekyll and Hyde kind of concept. It's a little bit far-fetched, but the movie just has so much fun with it. It's really well directed by Romero. It's quite violent in places, quite gory, but it does have some comical moments to it, and it just has a lot of fun with the concept. And yeah, I just think this film is very underrated. People don't really talk about it in terms of Stephen King or George A. Romero, but I absolutely love it. That is The Dark Half. Next up, I'm going to go with another Stephen King adaptation, and we have The Night Flyer. So this is based on a Stephen King short story, and it stars Miguel Ferrer, and he plays this news reporter who is investigating these murders that seem to be taking place at these rural airports around the country. And by the looks of it, the murderer seems to be flying into the airports at night, committing the murder, and then flying back out of the airport. But as the movie goes on, it turns out that maybe this person isn't a person, but rather maybe he's a vampire. And that's basically the movie, and it involves him investigating this. But this is such a great little film. Has that great sort of horror anthology kind of vibe to it. It worked well as a short story, but it also works really well as a movie. It was a TV movie, but it does have a really good quality to it, and it's really fun. And the last 20 minutes of this film is there's some creepy stuff in the ending of this movie, some really, really creepy imagery, and yeah, just an awesome ending. But yeah, it's such an underrated Stephen King adaptation, and yeah, I would definitely recommend it if you love horror, vampires, all that kind of stuff. But yeah, that is The Night Flyer. Next up, we have One Missed Call. So this is the original Japanese horror movie. I know there was a remake, but this one in particular is the original Japanese movie. And this movie involves this curse that's going around where people are receiving phone calls, and on the other end of the phone, it appears to be their future self, trying to warn them. But then the phone call, they all end with the future self dying on the other end. And then the person who receives the phone call then, for some reason, dies a few days later. And then we get to our main character who receives the exact same type of phone call as she decides she's going to investigate this and try and stop it before she meets her death. You could argue this movie is a little bit derivative of The Ring. It's a very, very similar concept. But I wanted to give a shout out to this movie because this movie has some really creepy moments in it. The last act in particular involves our main character exploring this abandoned hospital all by herself. And there's some really creepy stuff in that scene. It's a very anxiety-inducing scene. It's very edge of your seat. And yeah, there's just a lot of creepy moments in this film. And yeah, you could argue it is maybe not the most original of concepts, especially in terms of a lot of other Japanese horror movies, but I have a lot of fun with this one, and yeah, I think if you want like a good scary movie, definitely check out One Missed Call. Next up, I'm going to go with The Orphanage. So this is a Spanish horror movie from 2007. Now, this movie is probably not like a full-on horror movie. It's probably more of a horror drama, maybe in the same sense as The Sixth Sense or The Others. They're two movies that definitely have horror elements, but at their core, they're more like a drama film. And yeah, this is probably more of the same. It basically involves this family that move into this abandoned orphanage, and they basically just want to reopen it and get it going again. And as you can imagine, there's some strange goings on as they're living in this orphanage. But yeah, I love this movie. Like I said, it's maybe not like a full-on horror movie, so it's maybe not one you'd watch if you want to be really scared. But the story in this film is just so good, and the ending is very emotional. It always gets me, the ending to this movie. So if that sounds like something you're more interested in, definitely check it out. Not like a very scary movie, but just a fantastic drama with some horror elements in there. So yeah, that is The Orphanage. Next up, I'm going to go with Pin, released in 1988. So this is kind of a unique spin on some of those ventriloquism horror movies, like Magic with Anthony Hopkins. But this movie is basically about a doctor played by Terry O'Quinn, and he has this medical dummy by the name of Pin. And he has two children, and his two children are just obsessed with this dummy. They're like completely fixated over it. So the doctor basically uses Pin, and he communicates to his children via ventriloquism, and just teaches them like life lessons through this dummy. And then the movie progresses many years later. The two children have grown up. The daughter has moved on. You know, she's got her own life, all that kind of stuff. But the son, even though he's grown up, he's still fixated and obsessed with this dummy. And it kind of takes a very dark and sinister turn from then on. His mental health kind of deteriorates as his obsession with this dummy grows bigger and bigger. And yeah, it's just a really, really enjoyable, interesting psychological thriller slash horror. And yeah, it just doesn't really get talked about very much, but it's a really enjoyable movie. So yeah, definitely check out Pin. Next up, I'm going to go with a film which is probably going to be a little bit controversial, but I'm going to go with The Shining, but not the Stanley Kubrick Shining. I'm going to go with the 1997 miniseries. So yeah, I just wanted to mention this because I feel like I need to stand up for this movie because this movie gets so much hate from people. And I think the main reason why it does is because people just automatically compare it to the Stanley Kubrick film, which, don't get me wrong, is a great movie. But I've always preferred this miniseries, I have to say. It's not a remake, it's just another adaptation of the book. Maybe it's not as scary as the Kubrick film, but for me, it just handles the story and the characters so much better. The disintegration of the family, the effects of alcoholism, Jack's slow descent into madness, it's all handled so much better in this film. And for me, it just makes the story a lot more emotional in the end. Yeah, like I said, it's probably not as scary as the Kubrick film, but I just wanted to give it a mention because I feel like a lot of people really sleep on this movie, and I just don't think it's as bad as everyone says it is. If you've ever watched the Kubrick film and you've maybe wondered what was going on at certain points, or you maybe thought it was a bit too ambiguous, definitely check out this miniseries or the book, because it definitely brings a lot more of the story to light than the Kubrick film does. I don't hate the Kubrick film. Like, I'm not saying that. I just think this miniseries is very underrated and definitely worth checking out. So yeah, that is The Shining 1997 miniseries. Next up, I'm going to go with First, released in 2009. This is a Korean vampire movie directed by Park Chan-wook, who's probably best known for directing Oldboy. But this is such a unique spin on the vampire genre. It's basically about this guy who is a priest, but he gets turned into a vampire at the beginning of the movie. And obviously, when you become a vampire, you have to start drinking blood in order to survive. But because he's a priest and because he's such a good, upstanding citizen, he doesn't want to have to kill people in order to get blood. But obviously, he doesn't want to die either. So the first half of the movie is a little bit comical because he has to try and, figure out all these ways to drink people's blood without, causing them harm. And then as the film goes on, he meets this woman that he falls in love with, and she ends up getting turned into a vampire as well. But she is the complete opposite of him. She'll do whatever she wants to get blood. If she has to kill people, she'll do it. She doesn't care. She's a very dark, twisted character, and then the two of them as vampires, they obviously clash because of their differences in getting blood, and it kind of escalates from there, and it goes a bit darker in the second half. But man, it's just such a fun, unique spin on the vampire genre, and yeah, definitely worth checking out. If you've seen Oldboy, you'll know what a talented director Park Chan-wook is, and I think this is probably one of his best movies. But that is First. Next up, I'm going to go with Veronica. So this is a Spanish horror movie that was released in 2017. I believe it is on Netflix. But it's loosely based on this true story about this girl in the early 90s who died under mysterious circumstances after after finding a Ouija board. So it's very loosely based on that. But yeah, as you can probably tell, it's about this this girl who finds this Ouija board. She uses it, and then after that, some strange things start happening, and it kind of just goes from there. But yeah, I think this is a really solid, creepy horror movie. A lot of it takes place in the apartment complex where she lives, but yeah, there's some really creepy goings on in this movie, and it has a pretty decent ending as well. I think sometimes these types of movies can maybe go a bit too over the top by the last act, but this one I think does it pretty well. So yeah, I think it's a really underrated horror movie. Like I said, I think you can watch it on Netflix, but yeah, definitely check it out. So that is Veronica. And then the last film I'm going to go with is a Korean movie that was released in 2016, and that is The Wailing. So this movie is about a police officer who is sent to this small Korean village to investigate these mysterious deaths and mysterious illnesses that have been happening in the village. But when he gets there, he finds that there's more to this village than meets the eye. This movie is very similar to something like The Wicker Man or Midsommar in that, you know, it's very psychological, it's very unsettling, and obviously when he gets to this village, there's more to this village than a lot of the people who live there are really letting on, and it kind of escalates from there. It's a very long film, it's about 2.5 hours long, and a bit of a slow build, but like I said, it's just got some really unsettling moments in it before it all culminates in this really horrific ending to the movie. But yeah, I just think it's fantastic. One of the best Korean horror movies out there, and yeah, definitely check it out if you want something a little bit different. But yeah, that is The Wailing. So there you go, guys. That is my list of some of my favourite underrated horror movies. Really hope you've enjoyed the video. Let me know in the comments below if you've seen any of these movies. What do you think of them? Let me know some of your favourite underrated horror movies. I would love to hear your thoughts. But yeah, I hope you've enjoyed the video, and I will see you all again on the next one. So thanks again, guys, and take care.